In 2016, Uber drivers began disappearing across the Pacific Northwest, but no one connected the cases until one man's dash camera revealed the truth. This is the remarkable story of how David Park's final Uber ride exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been operating through the app for years. David Park wasn't supposed to be driving that night. The 34-year-old software engineer had planned to spend Sunday evening at home with his wife Sarah, helping her prepare for the medical procedure she'd been dreading for months. But when their insurance company denied coverage for a crucial part of her upcoming surgery, David made a decision that would cost him everything. Just one more weekend, he had told Sarah, kissing her forehead as she curled up on their second-hand couch with a cup of chamomile tea. The doctor said we need that extra $3,000 by December, and these late-night rides pay double. Sarah's worried expression still haunted David as he sat in his car outside Pike Place Market, waiting for his next fare. She had developed an anxiety disorder after her initial diagnosis, and David knew she counted the minutes until she returned home safe each night. He had promised her. No rides after midnight, no sketchy neighborhoods, no passengers who gave him a bad feeling. The Uber notification that changed everything arrived with a distinctive ping, 5 stars. Pickup location, Pioneer Square. Destination, 15,847 Tiger Mountain Road, Southeast Issaquah. The fare estimate showed $47, enough to cover Sarah's prescription medications for the week. David studied the request for nearly 30 seconds, something he rarely did. The pickup location was fine. Pioneer Square was well lit and usually had decent foot traffic even late at night, but the destination bothered him. Tiger Mountain Road was isolated, winding through dense Washington forest where cell service was spotty at best. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How much longer? Missing you." David typed back, "One more ride, sweetheart. Big fare. Home by 1 a.m. Promise." He accepted the request. What David didn't know, what none of the 7 rideshare drivers who would disappear over the next 4 years knew, was that Mike Johnson had never set foot in Seattle. The name was one of dozens created by the Kozlov crime family, complete with fabricated ride history, fake profile photos stolen from LinkedIn accounts, and carefully manufactured 5-star ratings. The burner phone used to create the account had been purchased 3 hours earlier from a 7-Eleven on Capitol Hill. The man who bought it paid cash, wore a baseball cap pulled low, and spoke broken English with a thick accent that the teenage cashier would later struggle to identify for police sketch artists. Viktor Kozlov's operation was sophisticated in ways that law enforcement wouldn't fully understand until years later. The Russian-born crime boss had been studying American rideshare patterns since 2014. When Uber first launched in Seattle, he realized that drivers like David, honest, hardworking people just trying to make ends meet, were perfect, unwitting surveillance assets. Every ride request was carefully planned. The Kozlov family would order rides to scope out police patrol routes, identify potential witnesses to their smuggling operations, and track the movements of law enforcement officials who used rideshare services. Most drivers never suspected anything. They picked up well-dressed passengers who made phone calls in foreign languages, dropped them off at seemingly innocent locations, and never thought about it again. But David Park was different. David paid attention. 3 weeks before his disappearance, David had picked up a passenger who would seal his fate. The man had requested a ride from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport to a warehouse district south of the city. He was well-dressed, polite, and tipped generously, exactly the kind of passenger every driver hoped for. But during the 20-minute ride, the passenger made 4 phone calls in what David's college roommate would later identify as Russian. The conversations were heated, involving what sounded like large sums of money, delivery schedules, and references to the Seattle route in the container from Vladivostok. David had a habit that would prove both crucial and deadly. He kept detailed logs of every ride, not just for tax purposes, but because his analytical mind, the same trait that made him an excellent software engineer, compelled him to track patterns, unusual requests, and passengers who stood out. In his notebook, found later in his home office, David had written, October 1st, 2016, airport pickup, passenger, Alexei Fee, Russian accent. Multiple phone calls, Reshipping containers. Mentioned $2.3 million. Pier 47, Thursday delivery. Seemed nervous when we passed police checkpoint on I-5. Tip, $50 cash. Unusual for 23 fare. That notebook entry would eventually help federal investigators identify the largest human trafficking and drug smuggling pipeline on the West Coast. David arrived at Pioneer Square at exactly 12:04 a.m. on October 17, 2016. The area was quieter than usual. Just a few late-night revelers heading home from bars and a homeless man pushing a shopping cart filled with bottles. David parked near the designated pickup spot and sent the standard message. Your Uber driver David is here. White Honda Civic. Minutes passed. No response. David tried calling the number associated with the account. It went straight to voicemail, a generic automated message with no personal greeting. This wasn't unusual. Many passengers didn't answer their phones. But something felt off. At 12:11 a.m., David received a text from the Mike Johnson account. Sorry, running late. Can you pick me up at the coordinates I'm sending? We'll tip extra. The coordinates led to a spot on Tiger Mountain Road, about 15 minutes from the original pickup location. David hesitated. His instincts told him to cancel the ride, but the promise of extra money for Sarah's medical bills overrode his caution. He sent a quick text to Sarah. Passenger change pickup location. Might be a bit later than planned. Love you. Her response came immediately. Be careful. Call me when you're heading home. Those would be the last words they ever exchanged. The GPS coordinates led David to a pullout on Tiger Mountain Road, surrounded by towering Douglas firs that blocked most of the moonlight. His headlights illuminated two vehicles, a black Escalade with tinted windows and a silver sedan, parked at an odd angle, as if it had arrived in a hurry. David's dash camera, a Christmas gift from Sarah who worried about his safety, captured everything that happened next with crystal clarity. 3 men emerged from the Escalade. The leader was tall, well-built, wearing an expensive leather jacket that probably cost more than David made in a month. His companions were younger, nervous-looking, constantly glancing around as if expecting trouble. David rolled down his window as the leader approached. Mike Johnson? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You are David Park. It wasn't a question. David's blood ran cold as he realized this man knew his name. His real name, not just his driver profile. I think there's been some mistake, David said, his hand moving toward his phone. I'm here for a ride too. No mistake, the man interrupted, his accent thick and unmistakably Russian. You see something you shouldn't have seen. Wrong place, wrong time. David's mind raced. 3 weeks earlier, the passenger from the airport, the phone calls about shipping containers and money. This was about that night. I don't know what you're talking about, David said, but his voice betrayed his fear. The Russian man gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward. David recognized him immediately, Alexei, the passenger who had made those mysterious phone calls. He remembers me, Alexei said in accented English. I can see it in his face. What happened next was captured in chilling detail by David's hidden dash camera. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 4 minutes that would eventually bring down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the West Coast. You keep notes, the leader said, pulling out a small notebook identical to the one David kept at home. Very detailed notes. About passengers, about conversations, about places we go. David's heart sank. They had been in his house. They had been watching him, studying him, learning his habits. How long had they known? My friend Alexei, he tells me you are a very observant driver, the Russian continued. You listen when people make phone calls. You write down things that are not your business. I just keep track of rides for tax purposes, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. I haven't told anyone anything. But you could, the leader replied. You could remember faces. You could remember voices. You could remember things that would be very bad for my business. One of the younger men shifted nervously, speaking rapidly in Russian. The leader held up a hand to silence him, never taking his eyes off David. You seem like good man, the Russian said, almost conversationally. You work hard. You take care of sick wife. I respect this. But you know too much. The dash camera audio picked up every word as the leader explained their operation with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Viktor Kozlov, though David wouldn't learn his name until much later, was proud of his system. "We use drivers like you for 2 years now," he said. "You go everywhere in city, you see everything. You never suspect. You map police routes for us. You help us understand where is safe to move our cargo." The scope of the operation was staggering. Dozens of fake passenger accounts, hundreds of rides used for surveillance, a network of drivers who unknowingly provided intelligence on law enforcement patterns across the entire Puget Sound region. "Most drivers, they forget passengers after 5 minutes," Kozlov continued. "But you remember everything. You write everything down. This makes you dangerous." David tried one last desperate plea. "I'll delete the notes. I'll forget everything. I just want to go home to my wife." Kozlov's expression softened for just a moment. "I believe you would try, but forgetting is not enough. My business, it requires certainty." What the dash camera recorded next would haunt investigators for years. David was forced from his car at gunpoint, his hands zip-tied behind his back with the efficiency of people who had done this before. The younger men worked quickly, searching his vehicle for any additional recording devices or evidence. Kozlov made one final statement, speaking directly to the camera he had spotted mounted on David's dashboard. "This man, he was good person. But sometimes good people see bad things, and bad things must stay hidden." David's last words, barely audible on the recording, were, "Tell Sarah I'm sorry." The SUV's engine started. David was loaded into the back seat. The dash camera continued recording as the two vehicles drove away, capturing clear images of both license plates, evidence that would prove crucial 4 years later. But the most chilling detail was what happened to David's Honda Civic. Two additional men arrived in a tow truck exactly 17 minutes after the SUV departed. They pushed the car to the edge of the ravine, allowing it to roll down the steep slope where it would remain hidden for years. The entire operation took less than an hour. By dawn, there was no trace that David Park had ever been on Tiger Mountain Road. Sarah Park's panic started at 2:30 a.m. when David's phone went straight to voicemail. The automated message played in her ear. "You've reached David Park. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." But David never let his phone go to voicemail, especially not when he was working. He had never, not once in their 8-year marriage, failed to call when he was running late. Sarah sat on their bed staring at her phone, willing it to ring. She tried calling again at 2:35, then 2:40, then every 5 minutes until her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. Each unanswered call sent waves of dread through her chest, a feeling she recognized from the day she'd received her cancer diagnosis 3 months earlier. By 3 a.m., Sarah was pacing their small apartment in her pajamas, checking and rechecking the Find My iPhone app that showed David's phone as offline. A status that made no sense. David was obsessive about keeping his phone charged while driving. He carried 2 portable battery packs and had a car charger that he tested and retested to make sure it would never fail. She called every hospital within a 50-mile radius. "I'm looking for my husband, David Park. He's 34, Korean-American, about 5 feet 8, driving a white Honda Civic. Has he been brought in tonight?" The same conversation over and over. No David Park in any emergency room. No John Doe matching his description. No accident reports involving his license plate number. The internet search was even more frustrating. Sarah scoured local news websites, police blotters, traffic reports, anything that might explain where David was. She checked the Washington State Patrol incident reports, the King County Sheriff's Office logs, even social media posts from other rideshare drivers who might have seen something unusual. At 3:47 a.m., she called David's younger brother Kevin in Portland. "I know it's late, but something's wrong. David isn't home. He's not answering his phone." "And Sarah, slow down," Kevin said, his voice thick with sleep. "What time was he supposed to be home?" "Midnight. He said one more ride, he'd be home by 1 a.m. at the latest." "Kevin, he's never late. Ever. Even when traffic is terrible, even when passengers make him wait, he always calls." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "Have you called the police?" "I will at 4 a.m. I looked it up. They won't take a missing person report until someone's been gone for at least 2 hours. But Kevin, I have this feeling. Something terrible has happened. She was right to trust that feeling. At exactly 4 a.m., Sarah called 911. The dispatcher was professional but routine. I need to connect you with the non-emergency line for a missing person report. Sarah was transferred to Officer James Mitchell, who had handled dozens of similar calls during his 12 years with Seattle PD. Ma'am, I understand you're concerned about your husband, but adults have the right to go missing, Officer Mitchell explained in the tired tone of someone who'd given this speech countless times. Most missing person cases resolve themselves within 24 hours. People have car trouble, they lose track of time, they make impulsive decisions. You don't understand, Sarah said, her voice cracking. David isn't like that. He's the most responsible person I know. He sets 3 alarms every morning. He calls when he's 5 minutes late. He's never, ever just disappeared. Mrs. Park, I need to ask some difficult questions. Has your husband been under any unusual stress lately? Financial problems? Marriage troubles? Has he been drinking more than usual or showing signs of depression? Sarah wanted to scream. Yes, they had financial stress. Her medical bills were crushing them. Yes, David had been working longer hours, taking on weekend shifts he used to refuse. But the officer was implying that David had simply left, abandoned her when she needed him most. Officer, my husband drives for Uber. There should be GPS data, ride records, something that shows where he went. Can't you check that? We'll need a warrant for that information, and frankly, ma'am, we're not going to get one for an adult who's been missing for less than 4 hours. I'd recommend waiting until tomorrow evening. If he's still gone by then, come to the station and we'll file a formal report. The call ended with Sarah feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. She spent the rest of the night sitting by their living room window, watching the street for David's headlights, jumping every time a car turned onto their block. By sunrise, she knew something terrible had happened to her husband. The next 72 hours were a nightmare of bureaucratic indifference. 2 different officers took Sarah's report, asked the same questions, gave the same non-committal responses. They checked with local hospitals, which Sarah had already done. They ran David's credit cards, no activity. They confirmed that his car was missing along with him, not helpful. But every officer Sarah spoke with seemed to approach the case with the same underlying assumption. David Park had chosen to disappear. Maybe he was overwhelmed by his wife's medical bills. Maybe he'd found someone else. Maybe he'd simply decided he needed a break from responsibility. Ma'am, I've seen this before, Officer Patricia Chen explained on day 2. The stress of a spouse's illness can cause people to make impulsive decisions. Has your husband ever talked about feeling trapped or overwhelmed? Sarah felt like she was living in an alternate reality where the man she'd been married to for 8 years was a stranger. The David they were describing, selfish, impulsive, likely to abandon his responsibilities, bore no resemblance to the man who brought her chamomile tea every night before bed, who had researched her diagnosis more thoroughly than some doctors, who worked extra shifts without complaint to pay for her medications. But Detective Maria Santos was different. Santos had been with Seattle PD for 15 years, the last 8 in missing persons. She'd seen genuine disappearances, and she'd seen people who wanted to vanish. When she inherited David Park's case on day 3, she immediately sensed something was wrong with how it had been handled. The first thing Santos noticed was Sarah Park herself. The woman sitting across from her desk wasn't displaying the angry denial of someone whose spouse had run off, or the guilty knowledge of someone who knew more than she was saying. Sarah Park was terrified, exhausted, and completely bewildered. The emotional state of someone whose world had been turned upside down by an inexplicable tragedy. Mrs. Park, I want you to walk me through your husband's routine on a typical night when he drives for Uber, Santos said, pulling out a fresh notepad. Start from when he left the house. For the next 2 hours, Sarah painted a detailed picture of David's work habits. He always checked his car before leaving. Oil, gas, tire pressure, phone charger. He texted her when he started his shift and when he was heading home. He kept detailed logs of every ride, not just for tax purposes, but because he was naturally analytical. He had specific routes he preferred, areas he avoided, and safety protocols he never violated. He wouldn't pick up passengers in certain neighborhoods after 10 p.m., Sarah explained. He wouldn't take rides to completely isolated areas unless the fare was substantial and the passenger had a good rating history. He was careful, Detective Santos. Maybe too careful. Santos spent the rest of that day diving into David's background. His employment history showed a pattern of reliability that bordered on obsessive. His former supervisor at the software company described him as the guy who checked his work 3 times and still worried he'd made a mistake. His Uber driver rating was 4.9 out of 5 stars, with passenger comments praising his punctuality, professionalism, and safe driving. This wasn't the profile of someone who would impulsively disappear. Santos immediately recognized that David Park didn't fit the standard categories for voluntary disappearance. His bank accounts were untouched, not just since the night he vanished, but showing no unusual withdrawals in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. His credit cards hadn't been used. His social media accounts showed no signs of depression, no contact with old girlfriends, no research into starting a new life somewhere else. More importantly, his Uber ride history painted the picture of a dedicated husband working extra hours to pay medical bills. In the 3 months since Sarah's diagnosis, David had increased his driving schedule by 40%, working almost every weekend and taking rides he would have previously declined. This man was working himself to exhaustion to pay for his wife's cancer treatment, Santos told her partner, Detective Ray Nguyen. You don't do that and then just walk away when things get tough. Santos spent her first week on the case meticulously reconstructing David's final night. She interviewed the bartender at the restaurant where David had picked up his second-to-last fare, a college student who remembered David because he'd helped carry her groceries when she was struggling with too many bags. She tracked down the passenger from that ride, who described David as friendly but tired, like he'd been working all day. But it was the Uber GPS data that told the most disturbing story. Santos had to fight for a warrant to access David's ride data, arguing that his disappearance showed signs of foul play rather than voluntary departure. When the data finally came through, it revealed a timeline that made her blood run cold. David's phone had tracked normally throughout the evening, following logical routes between pickup and drop-off locations. At 11:47 p.m., he'd accepted the ride request from Mike Johnson. The GPS showed him arriving at Pioneer Square at 12:04 a.m., where his phone remained stationary for exactly 17 minutes. Then something changed. At 12:21 a.m., David's phone began moving toward coordinates on Tiger Mountain Road, coordinates that were 15 miles away from the original pickup location. The movement was steady, consistent with highway driving, until 12:44 a.m. when the phone went completely dark. He didn't just disappear, Santos told Sarah during a follow-up meeting. Someone moved him. The question is whether he was conscious in driving himself or whether someone else was driving his car. The timeline suggested the latter. 17 minutes was too long for a normal passenger pickup, especially for someone as punctual as David, and the sudden location change to Tiger Mountain Road made no sense. Why would a passenger in Pioneer Square need to be picked up in the middle of a forest? But the most unsettling discovery came when Santos contacted Uber's security team. Detective, I need to tell you something that's unusual, said Michael Chen, Uber's head of safety operations. According to our system, Mr. Park's final ride is still active. Santos felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean still active? Our computers show that David Park accepted a ride from Mike Johnson at 11:47 p.m. on October 16, 2016. As far as our system is concerned, he's still en route to pick up that passenger. The ride was never completed, never canceled, never marked as a no-show. It's been showing as in progress for 3 days now. Is that normal? Detective, it's never happened before. Even if a driver's phone dies or they have an accident, the ride automatically times out after a few hours. But this one, it's like time stopped. Santos requested all available data on the Mike Johnson account. What she found made the case even more disturbing. The account had been created 3 hours before David's pickup, using a prepaid phone number and an email address that led to a dead end. The profile photo was stolen from a LinkedIn account belonging to a real Mike Johnson who lived in Detroit and had never been to Seattle. Most telling of all, the 5-star rating history that made the account appear legitimate had been manufactured. The supposed previous rides were all to locations that didn't exist, addresses that led to empty lots or non-existent buildings. Mrs. Park, Santos said during their meeting the following week. I need you to understand something. Your husband didn't disappear voluntarily. Someone planned this very carefully. Someone created a fake passenger account specifically to target him. Sarah's face went white. Target him? Why would anyone target David? That's what we're going to find out. Santos began expanding her investigation beyond David's immediate disappearance. She reached out to other police departments, asking about missing rideshare drivers. She contacted Uber and Lyft security teams, requesting data on suspicious passenger accounts and unusual ride patterns. What she discovered would eventually expose one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in the Pacific Northwest's history. But first, she had to prove that David Park was dead and that his death was connected to something much larger and more dangerous than a single missing person case. The investigation was just beginning. As Detective Santos dug deeper, she uncovered a pattern that chilled her to the bone. David Park wasn't the first rideshare driver to disappear under mysterious circumstances. Over the past 3 years, 6 other drivers across 4 different cities had vanished after accepting rides to isolated locations. Portland, Oregon, Marcus Williams, 28, disappeared after accepting a ride to a rural address outside the city. His car was found burned in a forest clearing 3 weeks later. Spokane, Washington, Jennifer Martinez, 31, vanished en route to pick up a passenger in an industrial district. Her vehicle was discovered at the bottom of a quarry with no trace of Jennifer. Vancouver, British Columbia, Thomas Chen, 35, never returned home after accepting what should have been a routine airport run. Canadian police found his car abandoned at a shopping mall, but security footage showed it had been driven there by someone else. The pattern was always the same: experienced drivers with clean records, fake passenger accounts with manufactured histories, and crime scenes that suggested professional execution. Santos reached out to law enforcement agencies in all 4 cities. None had connected their cases until she provided the common thread: rideshare drivers being used as unwitting surveillance assets by organized crime. The break in David Park's case came not from traditional police work, but from a group of weekend hikers looking for adventure on Tiger Mountain. Jake Martinez and his hiking club had been exploring unmarked trails for months, documenting hidden waterfalls and scenic viewpoints for their outdoor blog. On October 12, 2020, almost exactly 4 years after David's disappearance, Jake's group decided to investigate a ravine that didn't appear on any official trail maps. What they initially thought was illegally dumped camping equipment turned out to be the rusted remains of a white Honda Civic, partially buried under years of fallen branches and debris. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Seattle Police Department. Detective Santos, who had never stopped working David's case, arrived at the scene within hours. The car's license plate confirmed what she already knew. They had found David Park's final destination. But David's body wasn't in the vehicle. Forensics teams spent 3 days combing through the wreckage, finding David's wallet, his phone charging cable, and personal items that proved he had been in the car when it went over the ravine. But of David himself, there was no trace. The most important discovery was also the most hidden: David's dash camera, protected by a waterproof case and still containing its memory card after 4 years in the wilderness. The dash camera footage was a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's nightmare. 4 years of technological advancement had made it possible to enhance the audio and video quality far beyond what was available in 2016. Every word of the confrontation between David and his captors was crystal clear. But more importantly, the camera had captured the license plates of both vehicles used in the abduction. Those plate numbers led investigators directly to a car rental agency in Bellevue, where records showed the vehicles had been rented using false identification documents that forensic analysis traced back to a sophisticated forgery operation run by the Kozlov crime family. The investigation exploded across multiple jurisdictions. Federal agents working with Seattle police began unraveling a criminal network that stretched from Vancouver to San Francisco, with tentacles reaching back to organized crime groups in Russia and Eastern Europe. Viktor Kozlov's operation was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The rideshare surveillance was just one component of a massive smuggling network that moved drugs, weapons, and human trafficking victims through major West Coast ports. The fake passenger accounts had generated thousands of rides over 4 years, creating a detailed map of law enforcement patterns that allowed criminal operations to move with near impunity. On March 15, 2021, federal agents launched coordinated raids across 3 states. The operation, dubbed Driver Down in honor of David Park and the other missing drivers, targeted 14 locations simultaneously. Victor Kozlov was arrested at his waterfront mansion in Bellevue, where agents discovered a sophisticated command center with detailed maps of rideshare routes, police patrol patterns, and surveillance photos of law enforcement officials. The evidence suggested the criminal organization had been planning to expand their operations to other major cities using the same rideshare surveillance techniques that had worked so effectively in Seattle. But Kozlov's arrest revealed something even more disturbing. In his personal safe, investigators found detailed files on 47 different rideshare drivers who had unknowingly provided intelligence for criminal operations. David Park's file was the thickest, containing photos of his house, his wife, his daily routines, and copies of his meticulous ride logs. The files showed that Kozlov's organization had been monitoring these drivers for months, identifying those who posed potential security risks. David's attention to detail, the very trait that made him an excellent employee and loving husband, had made him a target. The trial of Victor Kozlov and his associates became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Seattle history. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh built her case around David Park's dash camera footage, presenting evidence that shocked even experienced law enforcement officials. The Kozlov family hadn't just been using rideshare drivers for surveillance. They had been systematically eliminating any drivers who showed signs of being too observant, too curious, or too likely to remember details that could compromise their operations. David Park was the 7th driver to be murdered, but he was the first whose death had been so thoroughly documented. His dash camera footage provided a rare window into the cold, calculating nature of organized crime operations that most people never see. During the trial, Sarah Park sat in the gallery every single day, wearing a small pin with David's photo. Her presence was a constant reminder of the human cost of the defendant's crimes. When Victor Kozlov finally took the stand in his own defense, he seemed genuinely affected by her quiet dignity. "Your husband," Kozlov said, looking directly at Sarah. "He was good man. He worked hard. He loved his family. What happened to him, it was not personal, it was business. But that doesn't make it right." It was the closest thing to an apology Sarah would ever receive, and the only time during the entire trial that Kozlov showed any emotion. Victor Kozlov was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 13 of his associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years. The criminal network that had operated for over a decade was completely dismantled, with assets worth over $50 million seized by federal authorities. But for Sarah Park, the legal victory felt hollow. The trial had answered questions about how and why David died, but it couldn't bring him back. His body was never recovered, leaving her without the closure that comes from a proper burial. In the years following the trial, Sarah channeled her grief into advocacy work. She partnered with rideshare companies to implement safety protocols that might have saved David's life: mandatory panic buttons, real-time location sharing with family members, enhanced background checks for passenger accounts, and AI systems designed to detect suspicious ride patterns. David's detailed ride logs, which had made him a target, also became his legacy. The notebook found in his home office helped federal investigators identify patterns in organized crime activity that had gone unnoticed for years. His meticulous record-keeping led to additional arrests and the dismantling of related criminal operations across the country. The David Park case fundamentally changed how law enforcement agencies view rideshare-related crimes. Police departments across the country began sharing data about missing drivers, suspicious ride requests, and patterns that might indicate organized crime surveillance. The technology industry responded as well. Uber, Lyft, and other rideshare companies invested millions in safety features directly inspired by David's case. GPS tracking became more sophisticated, passenger verification became more thorough, and driver communication with family members became a standard feature, rather than an optional add-on. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. David's story reminded people that the drivers who transport us late at night, who help us get home safely, who work extra hours to pay for their families' medical bills, are real people with real lives. They're not just part of the gig economy. They're our neighbors, our community members, people who deserve protection and respect. In 2022, the city of Seattle dedicated a small memorial garden to David Park and the other rideshare drivers who lost their lives while trying to make a living. The garden is located near Pike Place Market, not far from where David accepted his final ride request. Sarah Park spoke at the dedication ceremony. David always said that driving for Uber wasn't just about the money. He liked meeting people, hearing their stories, being part of their journey from one place to another. He would have been honored to know that his story is helping keep other drivers safe. The memorial includes a plaque with David's photo and a simple inscription. David Park, husband, driver, hero. His attention to detail saved lives he never knew about. Detective Maria Santos, now retired, keeps a copy of David's case file in her home office. Not because the case is unsolved, it's one of the most thoroughly resolved investigations in her career, but because it represents something important about the nature of heroism. David Park never set out to be a hero, Santos often tells audiences when she speaks about the case. He was just a guy trying to help his wife pay medical bills, but his careful record-keeping, his attention to detail, his refusal to ignore things that seem suspicious, those ordinary qualities of a good person ended up taking down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations we'd ever seen. 4 years after Viktor Kozlov's conviction, some questions about David Park's case remain unanswered. His body was never found, despite extensive searches of the areas where the criminal organization was known to dispose of evidence. Sarah Park still holds out hope that someday she'll be able to give her husband a proper burial. The full extent of the Kozlov family's rideshare surveillance network may never be known. Federal investigators believe they identified most of the fake passenger accounts in surveillance operations. But given the sophistication of the scheme, it's possible that some elements remain undiscovered. What is certain is that David Park's legacy extends far beyond his tragic death. The safety protocols implemented because of his case have already prevented other drivers from falling victim to similar schemes. The law enforcement cooperation sparked by his investigation has led to the arrest of dozens of additional criminals who might otherwise have continued operating in the shadows. David Park's story is ultimately one of ordinary heroism. He wasn't a police officer or a federal agent. He didn't set out to fight organized crime or expose criminal networks. He was simply a loving husband who worked hard to take care of his family, who paid attention to details, who treated every passenger with respect and professionalism. But those ordinary qualities, attention to detail, dedication to family, commitment to doing the right thing, proved to be extraordinary when they intersected with one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the West Coast. The mountains of Washington state still hold their secrets. The dense forests of Tiger Mountain still conceal evidence of crimes that may never be fully understood. But thanks to David Park's careful documentation, his hidden dash camera, and his ultimate sacrifice, those mountains hold a little less darkness than they did before. In the end, that may be the most any of us can hope for, that our ordinary lives, lived with integrity and attention to detail, might somehow make the world a little bit safer for the people we love. David Park's iPhone last pinged at 12:23 a.m. on October 17, 2016. But his story and his impact on the safety of rideshare drivers everywhere continues to this day. Sometimes justice takes 4 years to surface, but it always finds a way. And sometimes the most ordinary people among us turn out to be the heroes we need most.